The Xylosian War Council was a study in controlled chaos, a stark contrast to the sterile, logical hubs of their fleet. Holographic displays flickered, showing troop movements, supply lines, and the terrifying, grainy footage of the human soldiers. General Xylar stood at the center, his chitinous hide a deep, mottled purple, the color of high command. He was old, seasoned by 100 planetary conquests, his species' rationality a tool he wielded with precision. But the data from the front lines of the Terran conflict made no sense. "Their tactics are illogical," buzzed his aide, a younger officer named Vral. "They sacrifice defensive positions for counterattacks. They expose their supply lines to draw us into traps. They fight with emotion." Xylar clicked his mandibles in agreement. The humans were an anomaly. They had no hive mind, no psychic link, yet their coordination was terrifying. And they fought for patches of dirt with the ferocity of a species protecting their last breeding ground, even when the dirt held no strategic value. Their individual soldiers were the greatest puzzle. They wore suits of powered armor, thick ceramite and plasteel, that by Xylosian logic should have been the pinnacle of defensive technology. Yet the humans inside them didn't use them just for defense. They used them to charge, to close the distance, to get into the their brutal range where their primitive kinetics and shock blades were most effective. A new report flashed on a screen. A human stronghold on the moon of Torvin Prime had fallen. Among the spoils of war were several suits of the enemy's powered armor, damaged but partially intact. An idea, as alien as it was intriguing, took root in Xylar's mind. "Vral," he rumbled, "prepare a private medical bay, and have the engineers deliver the most intact human combat suit to that bay." Vral hesitated. "General, for what purpose?" Xylar straightened his own lighter, more ceremonial carapace. "To understand our enemy, one must first think like them. And to think like them, one must feel like them." He gestured to the footage of a human soldier, his faceplate a mask of fury and defiance. "They are connected to their armor. It is an extension of their bodies, their will. Perhaps inside it, I will find the flaw in their design." The idea was madness. A Xylosian was built for logic, for efficiency. Their bodies were lean, their limbs designed for quick, precise movements, not brute force. Their own armor was a light symbiotic weave that enhanced speed and provided environmental protection, not a mobile tank. But Xylar was not just any general. He was a strategist, and the greatest weakness of a logical mind was its inability to comprehend the illogical. He had to try. In the sterile silence of the medical bay, the human armor sat on a reinforced table. It was a brutalist masterpiece of engineering, all hard angles and thick plating. Scorch marks and deep gouges marred its surface, testaments to the violence of its last battle. Up close, it smelled of ozone, burned lubricant, and something else, a faint metallic tang that the sensors told him was dried human blood. It took 3 engineers and a complex exoskeleton to lift the torso piece. It was incredibly heavy. Xylar examined the interior. It was not the smooth, a form-fitting cocoon of a Xylosian suit. It was a chaotic mess of straps, buckles, cooling tubes, and impact-absorbing gel packs. It looked less like a piece of technology and more like the interior of a primitive beast. With the help of the medical bay's automated systems, the process began. First, the legs. He had to fold his own digitigrade legs in an unnatural way to fit into the thick armored cuisses and greaves. The servos whined in protest as they adjusted to a physiology they were not designed for. Next, the torso. It was like being encased in a metal coffin. The cooling tubes pressed against his thorax, and the weight was immediate and crushing. Finally, the arms and the helmet. As the helmet sealed itself with a hiss of equalizing pressure, the world changed. The helmet's heads-up display flickered to life, a cascade of alien symbols and targeting data. But it was the physical sensation that was most profound. The suit was not just a shell, it was a system. He could feel its power thrumming through the frame, a dormant beast waiting to be awakened. "Begin mobility tests," he commanded. His voice now filtered through the suit's external speakers, making it sound unnervingly deep. He took his first step. It was a catastrophe. The suit, designed for a creature with a different center of gravity, different muscle structure, and a different gait, fought him with every micron of movement. His first step was too heavy, the leg servos pistoning down with jarring force. The momentum carried him forward. He tried to correct with his upper body, but the massive torso piece was a dead weight. He staggered, his arms flailing instinctively. The suit's enhanced strength made the flail a dangerous sweep, sending a medical cart flying into the wall. He took a second step to try and steady himself, but his foot came down at the wrong angle. The suit's automated balance systems, calibrated for a human's bipedal motion, tried to compensate, but his alien nervous system sent conflicting signals. He felt his weight shift too far to the left. He leaned right, overcompensating. The room spun. For a brief, terrifying moment, he was airborne, a 250-kilogram chunk of metal and flesh caught in an inexorable arc. He hit the ground with a thunderous crash that echoed through the medical bay. The impact was immense. His chitin creaked in protest, and the air was driven from his breathing spiracles. He lay there, on his back, staring up at the ceiling lights through the helmet's visor, the cooling fans whirring loudly in his ears. Vrail rushed to his side, his own mandibles clicking with alarm. "General, are you injured? This is folly! The machine is incompatible!" But Xylar didn't answer. He just lay there, feeling the phantom feedback from the suit, the pressure of the floor against his back, the sheer overwhelming weight of the thing. He had commanded armies that had crushed civilizations. He had piloted starships that could crack planets. But in this single inert piece of human equipment, he had been utterly and completely defeated. He couldn't even stand up. A profound and unsettling thought began to form in his mind, yet one that had no place in the logical lexicon of a Xylosian general. It wasn't a tactical assessment. It was a feeling. Awe. If the shell was this difficult to even wear, what manner of creature must live inside it? The crash echoed in the silence of the bay. For a long moment, General Xylar didn't move. He simply existed within the fallen giant, feeling the suit's automated systems cycle through diagnostics. Warning runes, a garbled mess of human script he couldn't read, flashed on the HUD. And the weight that had been a burden moments ago was now an anchor, pinning him to the cold metal floor. "Deactivate the suit's primary power," he instructed Vrail, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual commanding boom. "It is not a simple on-off switch, General," Vrail replied, his claws tapping frantically at a datapad linked to the suit's external diagnostic port. "The human designs are redundant. The primary power cell is offline due to the impact. But the secondary musculature servos are still engaged, fighting my override commands." It was a perfect metaphor for the humans themselves. You could knock them down, even sever their main power, but some stubborn secondary system would keep fighting, keep resisting, making the simple act of recovering the body a chore. With Vral's guidance and the help of 2 engineering drones, they managed to manually release the torso's emergency clasps. The carapace split open with a hiss of venting gas, and Xylar was able to extract himself, his own limbs shaking from the unaccustomed strain. He stood over the fallen armor, rubbing a forelimb over his aching thorax. The physical shock was one thing, but the cognitive dissonance was far greater. He had walked into that suit expecting to find a weakness, a design flaw, an ergonomic error, a logical inconsistency he could exploit. Instead, he had found a puzzle. "This suit," he began, pacing slowly around it. "And its design is fundamentally aggressive. The weight distribution favors forward momentum. The joint servos are geared for power over precision. The internal strapping system is not for comfort, but for keeping the pilot locked in place during high-impact maneuvers. It is a crude, brutish design, Varel offered, eager to reinforce his general's initial logic. Our own combat chassis are far more elegant. Elegant? Xylar stopped and turned to face his aide. Varel, what is the primary combat doctrine of our warrior caste? Speed and precision, General. Strike vital points, eliminate command structures, minimize unnecessary engagement. It is the most efficient path to victory. And what is the primary combat doctrine of a human soldier based on our observations? Vral's antennae twitched as he accessed the tactical database in his mind. They close with the enemy. They seek to overwhelm through sheer force and tenacity. They are inefficient. Xylar gestured a claw at the suit. Precisely. This armor is not designed for the efficient warrior. It is designed for the creature that intends to close with the enemy. It is designed to absorb the hits that a speed-based fighter would never take. It is designed to deliver the killing blow at a range where precision is meaningless and only overwhelming power matters. He looked from the suit to the frozen image on a nearby screen. A human soldier, in his face streaked with dirt and blood, screaming a silent battle cry as he charged directly into a hail of Xylosian particle fire. The image was terrifying not because of the technology, but because of the absolute lack of self-preservation it displayed. We have been fighting the war on a tactical level, Xylar murmured, analyzing their fleet formations, their supply chains, their weapons capabilities, but we have failed to understand the fundamental unit of their military might. The individual. And this, he nudged the inert armor with his foot, this is their temple, their sanctuary. It is the thing that allows their fragile, soft bodies to become the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. He ordered the suit to be taken to his private research chamber. Over the following cycles, he didn't just study it, he obsessed over it. He had his engineers create a neural interface that could translate his commands more effectively, bypassing the suit's own balance systems. And he had them replicate the nutrient paste that humans used for long engagements and analyzed its chemical composition. He had them play footage of human training exercises, watching how they moved, how they fell, how they got back up. He learned that the suit's HUD was not just a tactical display, it was a psychological tool. It highlighted threats, sure, but it also tracked buddy units, displayed messages from home, and even had a function to play audio files, which the engineers identified as music. Music. An illogical sequence of sounds meant to evoke an emotional response, in a combat suit. He tried again. This time, he was prepared for the wait. He moved slower, more deliberately. He kept his center of gravity low, mimicking the crouched stances he'd seen in the human training vids. He took a step, then another. He wobbled, the servos groaning, but he didn't fall. He managed to walk 3 full strides before his alien gait caused a misstep and he stumbled into a wall, denting it. But he hadn't fallen. He repeated the process, cycle after cycle. He learned to trust the suit's automated balance, to stop fighting it and let it do the work it was designed for. He learned to use his upper body for momentum, to let the weight of the torso carry him forward. He learned to fall. The humans fell all the time in their training. They would hit the ground, roll, and spring back up. It was a fundamental part of their movement. So, he practiced falling. He let himself drop, felt the suit's padding absorb the shock, and then used the suit's power to force himself back to his feet. It was exhausting, painful, and completely illogical. But it was also, he had to admit, strangely exhilarating. One cycle, while practicing his gait in the vast emptiness of a cargo hold, he activated the audio function. A random file was selected. A wave of sound, unstructured and rhythmic, filled the helmet's speakers. It was a human war song, he later learned. It had a pounding beat, a simple, driving melody, and voices shouting in unison. It wasn't a tactical transmission. It was useless information. But as he marched to its rhythm, his steps became more natural, his movements less hesitant. The illogical sound had somehow given him a logic of movement. He felt a surge of something he couldn't name, a quickening of his pulse, a heightening of his focus. It was, he realized with a jolt, what the humans must call morale. He was no longer just a Zalosian general in a human suit. He was beginning to understand the creature within. Weeks passed. General Xylar's private research became an open secret among the fleet's high command. Some whispered that the strain of the campaign had broken him. Others, more tactically minded, watched with a keen interest. If their greatest strategist was dedicating this much time to understanding a single piece of enemy equipment, the implications for the war effort were profound. Xylar ignored them all. He was on the cusp of something, a revelation that went beyond mere tactics. He had mastered the basic movement. He could walk, jog, and even perform a clumsy, loping run. The suit no longer felt like a foreign prison. It was becoming an extension of himself, a second, heavier, more powerful skin. But there were still mysteries. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he was reviewing the suit's internal data logs, the ones recorded during its last battle before being captured. Using sophisticated Xylosian decryption algorithms, he was able to piece together fragments of the audio and visual feed from the human pilot's perspective. The quality was poor, distorted by damage. He saw a chaotic, shaking world. He heard the thunder of weapons, the scream of tortured metal, and the shouted curses of men. He saw the pilot's buddies through the HUD, their icons flickering. One by one, the icons went dark. Then came a final clear audio file, recorded internally just before the suit was disabled. It was the pilot's voice, ragged and breathless. "Squad's gone. Reactor's gonna blow in 90 seconds. I've got nothing left." There was a pause, filled only by the hiss of the pilot's breathing and the distant rumble of explosions. "My wife. She's having a baby. A girl. We were gonna name her Lily." Another pause, longer this time. Xylar found himself leaning forward, his mandibles still. "I'm not gonna make it, but this bucket of bolts still has a reactor, and I've got 80 seconds. The video feed showed the pilot's gauntleted hand reaching for a control panel, his movements suddenly calm and deliberate. He was overriding every safety protocol the suit possessed. The HUD lit up with red warnings. The pilot then activated his external speakers. "Oh, hey, you ugly bugs!" he screamed, his voice echoing across the battlefield, captured by the suit's own microphones. "You want this rock? Come and take it!" The feed showed the pilot, his armor sparking and smoking, charging not away from the impending reactor explosion, but towards the densest concentration of Xylosian forces. The last image was of a wall of enemy troopers, their weapons raised, and then the feed went white. Xylar sat back, and the helmet he was holding slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. He had witnessed countless deaths in his career. He had ordered them. He had analyzed them as data points in the grand equation of war. But this was different. This was not a statistic. This was a creature, faced with certain death and absolute hopelessness, who had chosen not to flee or to hide, but to use his own destruction as a weapon. He had taken his own mortality and turned it into a final, undefiant act of violence. The word the humans used for it came to him: sacrifice. It was a concept that existed in Xylosian logic, but only as a failure state. A commander might sacrifice a unit to save a larger force if the tactical equation demanded it. It was a cold, mathematical decision. But this was personal. This was emotional. This man had not died for a tactical advantage. He had died for his friends, for his home, for a daughter named Lily he would never see. He had died for them, his enemy, to show them that they could not break him. This was the core of the human mystery. It wasn't their strength, their technology, or even their ferocity. It was their ability to find meaning in the meaningless, to attach value to things that had no logical value, a patch of dirt, a friend's life, an idea, and to fight, kill, and die for those illogical values with a passion that no logical mind could comprehend or counter. The general looked at the suit, no longer a piece of equipment, but a relic, a tombstone for a man named only by his daughter's name, Lily. A sudden chilling thought gripped him. If the individual humans were capable of this, what would they be capable of if they were organized? If their emotional bonds were scaled up from a squad to a platoon, a battalion, an entire species? He had learned to walk in their armor. He had learned to move in it. But for the first time, he felt a tremor of true fear for what was coming. He understood the man in the machine, and understanding him made him infinitely more terrifying. The fear that had coiled in Xylar's thorax did not dissipate. It transmuted. It became a cold, hard knot of certainty. The war, as they had been fighting it, was unwinnable. They could destroy human ships, take their worlds, and annihilate their armies, but they could not destroy the thing that drove them. They could not kill the spirit of a soldier who, in his final seconds, thought not of his own life, but of a daughter he would never meet, and a promise to make the enemy pay. He summoned the War Council. The other generals filed in, their antennae twitching with curiosity and a hint of contempt. They had heard the rumors of their supreme commander playing dress-up in a dead enemy's shell. "General Xylar," buzzed General Vor, a younger, more aggressive commander. "I hope this meeting is to announce a new offensive. My legions grow restless. The humans on Cantos 4 are ripe for crushing." Xylar stood at the head of the table, not in his ceremonial carapace, but in a simple tunic. He looked older, wearier. "The offensive on Cantos 4 is cancelled." A wave of agitated clicks and buzzes rippled through the council. "Cancelled?" Vor stood up, his chiton flushing with anger. "With respect, General, that is insanity. We have them cornered. One decisive push, and their entire colony falls." "And how many legions will you lose taking it, Vor?" Xylar asked, his voice calm. "Losses are acceptable. The strategic value of the planet's ore deposits is worth the price." "Price," Xylar echoed, the word tasting strange on his tongue. "You speak of price in terms of resources and territory, but you are not counting the true cost." He activated the main holographic display. The grainy, as damaged footage from the human soldier's suit began to play. The council watched in silence as the soldier spoke of his squad, his wife, his unborn daughter. They watched as he charged, screaming defiance into their own lines. When the feed cut to white, the room was silent. "That soldier," Xylar said, "was one man, one unit. He was out of ammunition, out of time, and out of hope. By every logical measure, he was defeated. And yet, in his final act, he took as many of our warriors with him as he could. He turned his own death into a weapon." "It was a suicide run," Vor dismissed, though his voice was less confident. "A final desperate act. It changes nothing." "It changes everything," Xylar countered, his voice rising for the first time. "You see a suicide run. I see a template. What happens when an entire planet of humans decides to make that same choice? What happens when their fleets are gone, their armies shattered, and all that's left are billions of civilians, armed with nothing but the memory of a daughter named Lily and a desire to make us pay for taking her away?" He let the question hang in the air. The other generals shifted uncomfortably. "Our strategy has been to break their military," Xylar continued, "to shatter their ability to fight. But we have failed to understand that for a human, the ability to fight is not tied to logistics or tactics. It is tied to will, to emotion, to love and hate and fear and courage. You cannot break a human's will by destroying his tank. You have to destroy the reason he gets into the tank in the first place. And we have no idea how to do that, because we have no equivalent to it in our own psychology." He gestured to the silent suit of armor, now standing in a corner of the room like an obsidian statue. "I have worn their skin. I have felt their weight. I have moved as they move. And I have come to understand that we are not fighting a war of resources. We are fighting a war of beliefs, and they believe in their right to exist, to love, to fight, and to die on their own terms, with a fervor that we cannot match." For the first time, the council had no logical counter-argument. Their general was speaking a language they didn't fully understand, a language of the heart, not the mind. "What do you propose, then?" General Vor asked, the aggression gone from his voice, replaced by a somber uncertainty. Xylar looked at each of them, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the cold light of the holographic display. "We change our approach. We stop trying to conquer their worlds and start trying to understand their people. We need to know what they value, what they fear, what they love. We need to find a way to fight the heart, not just the body. Because if we push them too far, if we give them no hope, no reason to believe in a future, they will not surrender. They will make every world a grave, and every grave a weapon. They will become a species of martyrs, and in their death, they will find a victory we cannot comprehend." He was proposing a radical, illogical shift in strategy. But after seeing the truth inside that suit of armor, he knew it was the only logical path forward. The humans were not a problem to be solved with force. They were a force of nature to be understood, and if possible, appeased. The war for Earth, he realized, had just become infinitely more complex. The council disbanded in a state of profound unease. Xylar's words had planted a seed of doubt that logic could not uproot. In the days that followed, he implemented his new directive. Reconnaissance missions were shifted from military targets to civilian ones. They intercepted data streams, not for military codes, but for news reports, personal communications, entertainment. They built a profile of the human psyche, and what they found was baffling. And they watched human movies, stories of good versus evil, of heroic sacrifice, of love conquering all. They analyzed their music, a chaotic spectrum of sound designed to evoke joy, sorrow, anger, and hope. They read their poetry, their literature, their religious texts. They saw a species obsessed with stories, with meaning, with the idea that their lives were part of a larger narrative. One report caught Xylar's attention. It was an analysis of human art, and specifically a painting from their ancient history called The Scream. It depicted an androgynous figure on a bridge, hands clutching its face in a moment of primal existential terror. The report concluded that the painting was a depiction of universal human anxiety in the face of an indifferent universe. Xylar stared at the image for a long time. He understood the anxiety, the feeling of being small and insignificant. But the human response to it, as far as he could tell, it was not to succumb to it. It was to create, to paint a picture of their own despair, to share it, to find comfort in the shared experience of being afraid. They took their greatest weakness, their emotional fragility, and they turned it into art, into connection, into a source of strength. He contrasted this with a Xylosian in the same situation. A Xylosian would analyze the source of the anxiety, formulate a plan to eliminate it, and execute that plan with cold efficiency. If the source was an indifferent universe, they would simply accept it as a fact and move on. The human need to share, to communicate, to find meaning in the meaningless was completely alien. He began to understand their armor in a new light. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a canvas. They painted their squad insignias on it, their kill counts, their personal mottos. They gave their tanks names. They personalized their tools of death, turning them into extensions of their own stories. and the suit he had worn, the one that had belonged to the soldier with the unborn daughter, probably had a name. He wished he knew what it was. This new intelligence led to a shift in tactics. Instead of simply attacking human positions, Xylar began targeting their lines of communication. He didn't just want to disrupt their military coordination. He wanted to isolate them from their stories. He wanted to sever the emotional bonds that held their units together. Jamming signals wasn't enough, and they began broadcasting counter-narratives, propaganda designed to breed doubt and fear. They didn't try to convince the humans to surrender with logical arguments about the inevitability of their defeat. Instead, they tried to make them feel hopeless. They showed them images of their burning cities, their fallen comrades, and asked them, "For whom do you fight, now that they are gone?" For a time, it seemed to work. Resistance on some fronts became more fragmented, less coordinated. But then, something unexpected happened. The humans adapted. Their communications became more resilient, more encoded. But more than that, they changed the nature of their stories. They began broadcasting acts of defiance, of hope. A civilian rebuilding a home, a soldier sharing his last ration with a child, a musician playing an instrument in the ruins of a city. They were fighting the propaganda war with a weapon the Xylosians didn't possess, an unshakable belief in the future. Xylar watched a captured human broadcast. It showed a young woman, her face smudged with dirt, standing in a field of rubble. She wasn't crying or screaming. She was singing. It was a simple, old song, one of their anthems. Others in the rubble began to join in, their voices weak at first, then growing stronger. They were singing to each other, reminding each other that they were not alone. The message was clear. You can take our cities, our homes, our lives, but you cannot take our song. So he turned off the broadcast, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over him. He had learned to walk in their armor. He had learned to understand their minds, but their hearts remained a fortress he could not breach. They were not a species of soldiers. They were a species of storytellers, and their story was not over yet. The war ground on, a stalemate of unprecedented scale. The Xylosian war machine, designed for swift, efficient conquest, was bogged down in a quagmire of human tenacity, and they would take a world only to face a relentless insurgency. They would destroy a fleet only to have a new, more desperate one rise to replace it. The cost, in resources and in the psychological toll on his own troops, was becoming unsustainable. General Xylar spent more and more time in his research chamber, not to study the armor, but to be near it. It had become a symbol to him, a reminder of the enemy he could not defeat. He would often activate the audio files, on listening to the dead soldier's voice, the songs of his people, the fragments of their stories. It was his own form of illogical comfort, a connection to the mystery that consumed him. One cycle, a priority message arrived from the Xylosian High Command on the home world. It was an order. A new weapon, a planet killer of unprecedented power, had been developed. It was the ultimate logical solution to the human problem. The fleet was to converge on the human home world, Earth, and erase it from existence. With the heart of their species destroyed, the remaining human colonies would surely wither and die. It was the final, decisive blow. Xylar read the order 3 times. His tactical mind saw the logic. Remove the center, and the rest will collapse. It was clean, efficient, and final. But his mind, now tainted by his understanding of humanity, saw something else. He saw a species that drew its strength not from a single planet, but from its shared stories, its collective memory, its unyielding will. He saw billions of individuals, each with their own lily, their own song, their own reason to fight. Would destroying their home world break them? Or would it simply give them the ultimate story of victimhood, the ultimate reason for vengeance, the ultimate justification for a war without end? He looked at the human armor. He thought of the soldier who, in his final moments, thought of his daughter. If they destroyed Earth, that soldier's sacrifice would be meaningless. But the memory of it, the story of it, would live on in every human who heard it. And they would never, ever forgive. He was caught between the cold logic of his species and the incomprehensible emotional reality of the enemy. The decision he made in the next few moments would not only determine the fate of the war, but would also define who he, General Xylar of the Xylosian Empire, had become. The fleet amassed at the edge of the Sol system. It was the largest armada in Xylosian history, a city of starships bristling with weapons, their singular purpose the annihilation of a single blue-green world. From the command deck of his flagship, General Xylar watched the tactical display. Earth hung in the void, beautiful and fragile, a bauble of swirling clouds and blue oceans. It looked defenseless. It was anything but. The human fleet, a tattered collection of survivors from a dozen lost battles, those had formed a desperate defensive line between the Xylosian armada and their home. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. By every logical measure, their stand was futile. It was a gesture, a final defiant scream into the void. Vral stood beside him, his own carapace now scarred from the long campaign. "Their fleet is hailing us, General. They are demanding our surrender." A dry, clicking sound that might have been a laugh escaped Xylar. Demanding, not pleading, not negotiating. Undemanding, even in the face of absolute annihilation, their arrogance, their sheer illogical nerve, persisted. He could see the human ships on the view screen, their hulls battered, their weapons charged. He could imagine the people on board, the soldiers, the pilots, the engineers. Each one of them had a story. Each one of them had a name. Each one of them had someone they were fighting for. "The planet killer," he said, his voice flat. "Status. Armed and ready, General, and it can be deployed on your command." On your command. The power of a god or a devil rested in his claw. One order and billions of stories would end. One order and the song of humanity would be silenced forever. One order and the problem would be solved. He thought of the painting, the scream. He thought of the music, the poetry, the films. He thought of the soldier in the armor, charging to his death, his last thought of a daughter named Lily. And he thought of the woman singing in the rubble, her voice a thread of hope in a tapestry of despair. He thought of the desperate, hopeless, magnificent defiance of the human fleet before him. He understood them now, not their biology, not their technology, but their soul. And in understanding them, he had found something he had never possessed. A reason to fight that went beyond logic, beyond strategy, beyond victory itself. He had found a story of his own. He turned from the view screen and faced his bridge crew. Every eye, every antenna was fixed on him. "Open a channel to the entire fleet," he commanded, "and open a channel to the human fleet." The communications officer hesitated. "General, a fleet-wide channel will broadcast to both sides." "I am aware." The channel opened. On the view screen, the image of the human fleet was replaced by a split screen. On one side, the face of a human admiral, a grizzled, tired-looking man with eyes that held no fear, only a grim and weary resolve. On the other, the multifaceted visage of General Xylar. "Admiral of Earth," Xylar began, his voice translated by the ship's computer into perfect, if slightly mechanical, English. "I am General Xylar of the Xylosian Empire." The human admiral said nothing, just stared, waiting for the ultimatum. "I have studied your species," Xylar continued. "I have worn your armor. I have listened to your music. I have learned of your daughters named Lily and your songs sung in the rubble. I have come to understand that you are not a species we can conquer." A murmur ran through the Xylosian bridge. Vral stared at his general, his mandibles agape. "You see this as a war of survival," Xylar said. "We saw it as a war of expansion. We were wrong. We cannot expand into a heart that refuses to be broken. We cannot defeat an enemy that finds victory in its own defeat." He took a deep breath. It's the action feeling entirely natural in the moment. "My orders are to deploy a weapon that will destroy your world. It is the logical solution to our conflict. But I have learned that some things are more important than logic. Some things are worth more than victory." He looked directly at the human admiral. "I will not give that order." On the view screen, the human admiral's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, hope, disbelief, crossing his face. "Instead," Xylar declared, and his voice rising, filling the bridge, "I am ordering my fleet to stand down. I am ordering a full and immediate withdrawal from human space, and I am ordering that this message be broadcast to every corner of the Xylosian Empire, so that they may know the truth. We did not lose this war to a superior force. We lost it to an unbreakable idea. We lost it to the human spirit." He turned to face his own crew, his own people. "This is not a retreat. This is an acknowledgement. We have met a species whose strength lies not in their ships or their weapons, but in their hearts. And that is a battle we cannot win, and one we should never have started." For a long, breathless moment, there was silence. On the human ships, stunned disbelief. On the Xylosian ships, confusion and shock. Then, the human admiral spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "General Xylar," he said, I don't know what to say." Xylar gave a slow, deliberate bow of his head, or a gesture of respect he had learned from their cultural files. "Say that you will remember this day, not as a day of victory, but as a day when an enemy chose to understand you, rather than destroy you. Perhaps in time, that understanding can be the foundation for something more than war." He cut the channel. On the bridge of his flagship, the crew sat in stunned silence. Vral approached him slowly. "General, what have you done?" he whispered. Xylar looked at the view screen, and at the beautiful, fragile world of Earth, and at the battered, defiant fleet that protected it. He felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling he had never experienced after a tactical victory. He had not won a battle. He had, perhaps, ended a war. "I have finally learned to stand," he said quietly, echoing his first catastrophic attempt in the human armor. "Not in their suit, but in their story. And for the first time, I am not afraid." The Xylosian fleet, in disarray and without orders from their highest commander, began to power down their weapons. The human fleet, hesitant and unbelieving, held their position. And in the vast, silent void between them, a new story began. A story not of conquest and destruction, but of a single, impossible act of understanding. The alien general, who had once put on a human armor and couldn't even stay on his feet, had finally found his balance. And in doing so, he had changed the universe.